This is America Offline with David Klein. Real conversations, authentic connections with digital wellness experts and mental game gurus. No texting, emailing, snapping, we ain't even tweeting. We're hopping online to talk mental health, mindfulness, and how good it feels to be offline. Coaching you up and how to take control of tech so tech doesn't take control of you.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of America Offline. We are here today with Robert Plotkin. Robert, how you doing?
Great, David. How are you? I'm doing really well.
I'm doing well myself. So I'm really excited to have you on the show today. Why don't we just dive right in? And I'm not too familiar with you. I know you got another podcast as well, which we'll plug here. But why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and your path and how you got to where you are today?
So my podcast is a Technology for Mindfulness podcast. And the way I came to that and the blog and the other stuff we do at Technology for Mindfulness is that I've been using technology since I was a kid. I started programming, it's close to 40 years ago as a kid in the early 80s. Back on, for those who know about them, a TRS-80. I loved computers. And I used computers back in those days to program and to write, really as a tool for creativity. That's what got me into it. Yeah, I played video games, back in the day, but my main love for computers was that they were a tool for augmenting and helping me be creative. And, I did that for a long time before there was an internet. It's hard for people to remember what that was like, but the key thing I remember about it was I could sit down at a computer, and whether I was writing code or writing a story, I could be really deeply focused, in that zone at a computer. I know it sounds hard to believe because our experience is so different now, but because there was no internet, there was no email, there were no distractions, there was no social media. There wasn't even multiple applications that you could run at the same time.
Right. Mm-hmm.
And I then gradually experienced that disappearing once the web came around and mobile devices and high-speed internet and internet available everywhere. I'm a lawyer full-time. I'm a patent lawyer. And in my work, I have to be able to really focus in depth for long periods of time when I'm studying a client's invention or writing about it. And I started as a lawyer in 1996, so it was just around the time when the web was starting. Believe it or not, it was just when lawyers were starting to communicate with clients by email, and not only by scheduled appointments. And how much time has changed now. Clients contacting me constantly, looking for instant responses. So I started struggling with the constant distraction and demands on my attention through all of these years that it was happening. And I wanted to find a way to regain that control over my attention without giving up on technology. It wasn't a practical option for me, and it wasn't something I wanted to do. Right. I wanted to try to regain all of the great benefits of the technology I remembered from the past, while keeping the benefits of the new technology, the high speed, the ability to communicate, but get rid of the negative side, the distraction, the stress, the anxiety, all of that. And that's what motivated me to start on Technology for Mindfulness, which started as a blog, where I gave people tips, very practical pointers for how to reconfigure their phones, how to develop new habits, ways to regain focus. And it was all based on my own personal experience, including a lot of trial and error. Things I've tried, and I'm always experimenting with this. Yeah, and the last thing I'll add in, which I have found very helpful for myself, and which I try to bring to people, is that for almost as long as I've been programming computers, I've been studying martial arts, and have had the great benefit of studying under teachers who've taught it with a real mindfulness angle, that incorporate mindfulness into the practice and the teaching. And so it was a few years ago when I kind of had a light bulb go off, when I was getting really stressed out by my phone constantly distracting me, beeping, buzzing, notifying me of messages coming in, when I realized that the feeling I would have when a notification would come in, that tightness in my chest and stress and kind of tightening up, felt very much like when someone would throw a punch at me in a karate class, that physiological response. And I realized, I've practiced for a long time for how to take control over how I respond to an attack through martial arts training. There's got to be ways I can bring that to how I interact with my phone. And so again, I experimented a lot and came up with a bunch of exercises, techniques, which I now teach through Technology for Mindfulness, which basically are inspired by a combination of mindfulness meditation and martial arts that can help people retrain their habits for how they work with technology. I'd be glad to share some of those examples with you, but maybe I'll just stop there. That's the short story.
Yeah, we'll get into some of those examples in a second. But I think the good bridge, Robert, is like, why, if I'm a worker, right, and I've got the regular 9 to 5, like, why is it important that I pay attention to limiting my distractions? How do you convince people out there that this is important? Because as you know, there are many progressive folks out there that believe in this digital wellness space, reducing digital distraction. That's important, but there's also people that are just not even aware of it. So what would you say to the person who's sort of questioning whether or not this is even a thing?
Yeah, it's a great question. And there are people who will say things like, I don't think this is a problem for me. I think I'm super productive. I think I can handle the technology. And I'm not saying that that's all completely false, but studies have shown very clearly in recent years that people are wildly inaccurate about how productive they are when they're multitasking. And in fact, the people who believe they are most productive at multitasking, so when they're surveyed and they're asked, how good do you think you are at multitasking? The people who report being the best are the worst.
Interesting. That is really interesting.
Yeah.
So it's they might be productive, but the statistics are showing that this is often just not the case, really.
Yeah, so I encourage those people to, do some experimentation. You can do some simple tests. You can go about your business in your normal way on trying to do some tasks while you've got a screen up with 10 windows. And then you can try doing some of the same things. You don't have to put aside a day for it. Set aside an hour doing tasks,
right?
With only doing one at a time.
Yeah.
And see how it's not just how much more productive you are, but how you feel, the difference in how you feel, how much more relaxed and control and calm you feel. Now, there can be some initial increase in anxiety that comes about when you switch to what some people call single tasking or sequential tasking. We're only doing one at a time. The anxiety that comes from focusing on one task and then your mind starting to generate worry about all the other things you're not doing at the moment.
Right.
But that's why I suggest starting an experiment with yourself for a short period of time, a half an hour, or even an hour. That's kind of inconsequential, where there'll be no horrible consequences if you don't get to those other things, and just try it out. And I think most people find that you can actually be more productive when you're more focused. It might feel like you're slowing down, but you can get more done. A very simple, one of the many reasons for it is what's called switching costs, which very simply means it takes time and mental energy to switch from one task to another. Right. Let's say even if it's from reading an email to being on a phone call and then going back to email. You get on the phone, you have to remind yourself, who am I speaking to? What are we talking about? That might take 15 or 20 seconds. Then you go back to, let's say, a document you were writing. You have to refresh your memory. Where was I? What was I writing about here? Let's say that takes only a minute. And there are studies that show that sometimes that can take 5-10 minutes. Multiply that by the 10, 20, 50, 100 times you might engage in that switching every day, and you've got massive, decreases in efficiency.
Yeah.
So the one reason I start with efficiency and productivity is because you said, what about the people who are skeptical? Usually the skeptical people are most convinced by the improvements in productivity that this can bring about, not the general health and wellness benefits, of which there are many and I could speak about.
Yeah, interesting. So Robert, when you first started out, well, maybe even just now, like if you're just getting into it, like let's say there's a listener right now that just turned this on for the first time and is starting to be like, oh, okay, now some of this makes sense. You know, you mentioned a test and testing a little bit. I think that's good, and you know, just trying. Hey, let's just go on airplane mode. I'm just going to write, you know, this part of this chapter that I need to be writing. But like, what's a great way for someone to break in to start developing a bit of a practice? What are some of what's some of the low hanging fruit? Yeah,
I think the first low hanging fruit is, you just mentioned airplane mode or do not disturb, is making use of that. It's very simple. It can be as simple as, when I'm going to write a chapter, when I'm going to be in a meeting with someone, when I'm going to be on a phone call, when I'm going to do anything that requires focus, I'm going to get in the habit of turning on Do Not Disturb on my phone. It's so easy to do. For people who don't know, on an iPhone, you just swipe up from the bottom and tap the moon icon. It takes 2 seconds, literally.
Yep.
That is super low-hanging fruit, because for those people who haven't made use of it ever, it stops notifications from popping up. And if that makes you feel anxious because you're going to miss stuff, you can go and see the notifications anytime you want. They don't disappear into a black hole. They just won't pop up and interrupt you with something visual or a sound. That's the first kind of triage technique I recommend to anybody.
So in some ways, what you're saying is that you could set up your phone so that you decide when to go to your phone. You made the decision, as opposed to the phone or your device knocking you and being like, hey, I'm here, check out me, check out me. So it's a little bit different. So and I use that all the time, but also on their phones too. For the listeners out there, you could have it automatically go on at a certain time at night. So from 9 p.m. to 9 a.m., 12 hours of the day, it automatically goes on Do Not Disturb for me. That's worked out quite nicely.
Yeah. And if you want to think of progressions of levels, right? The first would be manually turn it on a couple of times when you need focus. Next might be automatically. Here's a real high level challenge. Have it on all the time. I don't do that all the time, but there are certain days when I'll have it on. You can set it to let through your, quote, VIPs, people you put in as your favorites, husband, wife, boss, anyone who really needs, child, people who really need to reach you, if that's a concern. And then challenge yourself, ask yourself, what other than that do I really need to be notified about?
Right. Totally. I mean, imagine if just you reclaimed 30 minutes a day.
Yeah.
2.5 hours a week, 52 weeks a year. I don't know how many days that is that you're reclaiming, how much more time you're going to have to do the things that you want to do, work out, meditate, hang out with your spouse, all these other things. I mean, we work so hard all the time. Do we really need to be working 12 hours a day? Is it possible to have the same work output that we would have from 12 hours and do it in 8 hours, but also be able to go home and have enough energy to work out and take time with our spouse, and then be able to be recharged so we can have a great 8 hours the next day? I think there's possibilities there.
There are. And, as you implied here, there are many ways in which managing the amount of interruptions you have gives you more energy. So it can sometimes leave people, if they're turning on notifications, they feel like they're missing out on something. There's something they need to do, that maybe they're being less efficient because they're not attending to things when they need it. Actually, if you take a step back and look over the course of a day or a week or a month, what you get done, you can get that done much more efficiently. And as you said, the time then when you're not on your devices can feel so much better because you're with your family or friends are doing other things and not constantly attending to the device.
Robert, what about, because I got a lot of friends that, they're early mid 30s and they're in tech sales, and it's almost like a badge of honor that they're like, I get back to emails in 10 minutes. I have to.
Yeah.
Well, how would you, if you were brought into a company or you brought in with to work with a team where it was this high performing, ultra aggressive sales culture, how could you create a scenario where you're still serving the clients and responding to clients and still being responsive, but not having it overwhelm your life so that you're constantly living inside your inbox?
Yeah. It's interesting. When people tell me that they need to be constantly responsive to messages, I often say, unless you're in a job like sales, you probably really don't need to be that responsive. Right. So that's the first thing I'd suggest to anyone, is to question your own assumption about how responsive you really need to be. So I'm a lawyer. And these days, I need to be really responsive to clients, even existing clients who have a good relationship with me. They have other options. They could go elsewhere. And I remember when I first started taking small steps, like blocking out 2 or 3 hours at a time where I just wouldn't respond to email. And I remember, so this is where some of the mindfulness comes into play. I was able to notice my mind generating this thought and fear that my clients would leave me. Or they'd have some serious judgment about me if I didn't respond quickly to an email. So I was able to pay attention to that fear, go ahead and test it out. Spend a morning without responding. And you know what? The world didn't collapse. No clients left me. There was really no negative consequences for it. And so I've continued to experiment in that way. So the first thing is, your fears may not really be as justified as your mind is leading you to believe. Now, let's say you are in a job like sales where there really is some validity to the fact that you need to be responsive. There's 2 things I would say. Is 1, be very attentive to the tendency of your mind to keep telling you that when you're off work. Because our minds, when you're in a job and you're doing that job 8, 10, whatever hours a day, and you develop a habit of mind of being extremely responsive in a way that is adaptive to your work, your mind is likely to keep that habit going at other times when you don't need it.
Right. Yeah.
So the only way to stop that is to pay conscious attention to your mind telling you when you're on vacation and it's not a potential customer contacting you. Your mind may tell you, I need to respond because that's the habit, that groove you've dug in your mind, even when it's not true.
Yeah.
And the last thing I'll say is some of these solutions can really only be, they can't be put into place by an individual on their own. So, if you really want the salespeople in an organization to be able to have the freedom to not be on 24 hours a day, then it's going to have to be a result of a collaboration among the team, among the management, the company, being able to set policies and procedures so that, hey, there's 5 people on the team. And there's a great book called Sleeping with Your Smartphone, written by a consultant who talks about putting this strategy in place, amongst consultants working 80, 100 hours a week. They agreed. Okay, there's a team of 5 people. Mary's night off is Monday. Okay? And what that means is the other 4 people on the team will not message her on Monday night or expect her to respond to messages on Monday night. And Joe's is Tuesday, all throughout the team. And that lets people have that time off that they need. And what she said was not only did their productivity increase, their sense of connectedness and camaraderie within the team just skyrocketed because they each felt like they had each other's back.
Right.
And it meant that at that time, those people maybe knew if a critical message came in from a client for Mary on her night off, they would respond to it for her.
Yeah.
But that can only be done by collaboration and cooperation amongst multiple people.
Totally. Do you think that we're getting closer to having corporate structures that will support those types of standards? Because it's important. We're seeing skyrocketing rates of burnout, particularly among millennials. People plugged in all the time, having trouble with retention. I mean, millennials are dropping, they're jumping jobs once a year.
Yeah.
And it's also difficult times to attract good talent. I feel like there might be an opportunity for companies, progressive companies, to attract and retain quality talent and to get the most out of them by paying attention to their well-being.
Yeah, I think there's absolutely a need for that. And you could even say a business opportunity for it. Unfortunately, I can't say I'm seeing this being done in a widespread way currently, at companies. I think it would be a great idea. I think it requires some, leadership from the top down to set the tone and the policies. And I think, even when it's not a formal policy, when people see their boss, the supervisor, the CEO, whoever it is, being constantly responsive, when they see that person responding to emails at 11:30 at night, it sends people the message, well, what's going to happen to me if I don't do that? Whether it's a policy or not. So unfortunately, no, I don't see it happening, but I think it would be great for it to be done. And the message I'd send out to listeners, if you are in any kind of position to nudge things in your company in that direction, take advantage of it. And even if you're not a supervisor, are there ways you can try to work on these things with coworkers or other ways, where you don't need to wait for someone? You may not be in that position in the company, but there may be ways you can do this on your own, even in small steps.
Yeah. So what are I'm kind of curious, talking actionably now, Robert, what are some of let's just stick with email for a second, because I think email and wasted time in meetings are probably two of the biggest time wasters out there, for sure. What are some of your personal email practices or some things that you've seen really help other people save time as far as how they're interacting with their email inboxes?
For all of these, I would always say almost everything that saves time can also reduce stress. So something that I do, and I'm going to be prepared for people's objections to this, so I'll just say that before I even mention it, which is to block out time in your day for email. And I go even further, which is there's certain categories of email that I know I'm going to be dealing with every day. So I'm a business owner in addition to being a lawyer. So I've got certain management type emails. I've got certain financial type emails. I've got direct client emails. I've got, a few different categories. I put slots in my calendar every day for responding to those, so that when my calendar appointment comes up for financial, I go to my inbox. I've also, now it depends on what email software you use, I use tags or categories for emails. As soon as something comes whenever I'm checking email, I tag things. I happen to use Outlook most of the time, which lets you then view your inbox grouped into these categories, so that my financial appointment comes up. I go to my inbox, which has all the categories collapsed, so I don't see any actual emails that might distract me. When I go there, I open up the financial category, and I go through all of those emails, one after the other. It's very efficient for many reasons. There's no switching cost, including the switching cost of getting yourself into the financial mindset, Right. And so I do that. It requires a certain amount of discipline that at that point, I don't go and look at a marketing related email. Now, how you set this up is going to really vary depending on the nature of your work, what types of things you're dealing with, and what's practical for you. There was a while when I did financial stuff twice a day, not just once a day. And then I realized certain things I didn't even need to do every day. There were certain types of emails I could do 2 or 3 times a week only.
Right.
So here's the objections that people have to it. One is kind of the one you said about sales. I can't wait that long in between. That's a big one. I won't go into the details of why it's still helpful, but the main thing is, my answer is since this system is not perfect, but if you could bring about a 10% improvement, why wouldn't you do it?
Right.
Go through your day, and there are a few times when it's not in your calendar to look at financial email, but you respond to some. As long as you are doing better than you were when you just went through whatever happened to be in your inbox at every minute of the day, you've made progress. And
totally.
the key thing is, it absolutely frees up time to do what I jokingly call work, which is the actual work I need to be doing for client. We all have that, quote, real work.
Yeah.
The things that are not responding to messages, writing a document, doing some creative work, consulting with a client, designing a product. I'm sure you all have the experience of spending your day feeling like your job should be called message responder, right?
Right.
This system can help free up time to do actual work.
Yeah, I love it. It makes me think of Cal Newport and his whole deep work concept of just doing the big difficult thing first and really blocking time for it, and you can progress to other things later on. But yeah, I mean, I think that little concept about sort of organizing your emails by whether it be priority or how much mental strength you need to do that, and sort of batching them. I think it's a great technique. And then, something else that I would, if I were coaching someone, I would say, look, like, find a practice that works for you. Like you said, figure out your nature of your work. Like, if maybe, for instance, if I'm booking podcasts, I don't need to be spending 10 minutes multiple times a day booking podcasts. I could just batch it and spend 30 minutes once a week just finding podcast guests. But there's different ways to set up your days and the types of emails. Like if it's just logistical things, like I'll leave that to the end of the day where I'm burnt out, but I want to leave like the deep work, like you said, like first when I'm fresh mentally.
Yeah. And that, so something about yourself, right? And everyone is going to be different. I've learned I don't do deep, detailed writing first thing in the morning. It's just not the way my brain works. Right. For me, it's more like 10, 11 o'clock through 3 or 4 is the best time for me. Different people are different. So know yourself, know yourself and experiment with it. You may also find it changes over time. There needs to be a balance between some structure and flexibility for everybody.
Totally. And Robert, I want to maybe transition a little bit. I mean, I recognize that you've done some stuff on Insight Timer with you have a meditation course. Yeah. I mean, how does just like self-awareness and mindfulness just play into this whole thing? I mean, is that a solid next step that people can take as far as taking their attention back?
Yeah, I think that, practicing mindfulness in whatever form you do it, it doesn't necessarily have to be formal meditation practice, is really helpful. It can be, one way you can think about it, it can be a mechanism that can help you to implement a lot of these things we talked about. So what do I mean? So let's say you set up one of these structures where I'm going to do this kind of email at this time, another type of email another time. Well, what happens when when you're scheduled to do your deep work at a certain time, and then your mind tells you, hey, David, you should probably go and check Facebook right now.
Right.
One thing that mindfulness practice can do, if you practice it regularly, is help you become capable of spotting that thought when it arises and be able to pause before you act on it. Right. Because otherwise we're all inclined to not just have the idea of checking Facebook, but to reflexively act on it and check Facebook. And then when we're there, to go do something else and go down a rabbit hole. Yeah. So if you think of mindfulness as a way of practicing paying attention to what your experience is from moment to moment, that includes noticing your own urges to divert from your plan, whatever that plan might be. So, that's one way in which I say it's a mechanism for helping you to implement what you decide. There are certain people out there, I'm not going to name names to be critical, who talk about ways in which you can, suggestions they have for changing your technology habits. But, if you don't have a way to make sure that you stick to it, the best ideas or plans can easily fall to the wayside. I mean, we're talking now right after New Year's, when New Year's resolutions are often made and rarely kept past February 1st.
Right.
So why is that? Very often just having a strong desire or setting your will to doing something is not enough to enable you to actually carry it through in action from moment to moment, which is when it's necessary. So practicing mindfulness in some way can help you with that. You'll notice when you veered, and you can apply that to technology. And the thing about technology, which is really pernicious, is that we both have these internal urges. Oh, I'm looking at my phone. I want to check my email now. But that the technology helps us by prodding us to do that through notifications, through, putting up attractive stimuli to us that try, so to speak, to pull us in. Right. So that's why it's even more important to practice mindfulness in some way, so that you can notice, my phone's beeping at me. I see that that's happening. I feel the urge to respond to it, but I can pause and not necessarily act on that urge. And if you don't have that habit of mind, it's all that much easier to just act instinctively and automatically to what the phone is doing.
Totally. As you were talking, Robert, something kind of clicked for me a little bit. Yeah. And it was just, like the whole dopamine loop, trigger, action, and response. Yeah. So, we have triggers, right? We have those internal triggers, those internal urges that I just want to check my email. I don't know where that came from. I want to check how many likes I got. And then we have the external triggers, right? Where we get a ping, or we get a vibration, or we get a sound. But it's not that it just goes trigger then to action and response. The mindfulness is almost it's in between the trigger and the action, right? And if we can manage and implement and infuse a little bit of mindfulness and awareness in between that trigger and the action, then we could stop it in its tracks and reclaim our attention in that moment.
Yes. Absolutely. You can think of it as helping you insert that kind of mindful pause. I'd love to share an exercise with you that's part of what I teach. Yeah. Now, my phone is off because one of my habits is that when I'm on a call, particularly a podcast interview, I turn my phone completely off. But I'll turn it on now to do one of these, and your listeners and viewers can follow along with us. This is an exercise to help you train one of these pauses. So you can wake your phone up, which I know you'd never otherwise ask your listeners to do while they're listening to your podcast. Yeah. And I want you to find the icon for the app that most sucks you into it. And it's going to be different for everybody. So Dave, I'm going to put you in the hot seat and ask you, what is that app for you?
Probably Twitter.
Okay.
Probably Twitter. I'll just open up Twitter and...
Don't open it yet, though.
Okay, I won't open it. I won't open it.
So this is part of the practice. The practice is to find the icon, okay? Get to it, whether it's on your home screen or otherwise. For me, it's still email. You're going to take your finger and slowly move it towards the icon and then stop right before you touch the screen. So now you're looking at the screen. Your finger is there hovering over the icon. And now the exercise is both to pause and to pay attention to what you are feeling and thinking while that's happening. So if you don't mind sharing with us maybe a thought that's going through your mind or a feeling in your body that might have arisen when you put that finger over and didn't tap.
It's almost like I have a present, I'm Jewish, so it's like a Hanukkah present, that I'm holding, but they're telling me I can't open. But I'm also in the back of my head, I know what's in that present, and I know I don't really need it now.
Oh, that's good. Okay, that's great.
That's what came up for me. It was
that's
weird.
Good. That's good. And everyone out there, it's going to be different for all of you. So one thing I still often feel when I put my finger on the email is some tightness in my chest, some tension in anticipation of what's there. People often feel some sort of urge to tap or resistance to not tapping. All of these things. Your breath might stop or slow down. There's all kinds of reactions, but the point is to pay attention and then to notice that you're paused and that everything's okay.
Right.
So you can keep practicing this. And, one way I suggest people practice is stay there for a while and feel that experience of not tapping, and then pull your finger away. The next way to do is what I call rep training, just like in the gym, with dumbbells.
I was about to say, this is like lifting weights for your mind, right?
It is, because it can feel difficult to sit there.
It's a muscle, right? It's a muscle.
It's a muscle. It's a mind, it's a mental muscle. It's also physical. Is to take your finger, move towards the icon, not tap, pull it away. Go, not tap, pull it away, and keep training. What you're doing, you're actually
lifting weights, man. Just lift the weights.
Yeah, you're practicing starting to engage and pausing and pulling your finger away, and then see. So now it's tomorrow. You're not thinking about this exercise. You're wrapped up in your busy day, and you start to reach for Twitter. It's going to be more likely that you'll be able to pause and not automatically and instinctively engage in that habit loop if you've practiced this over and over again. I actually, when I started coming up with these, realized that I often had my phone in like a suit pocket or jacket pocket. So I'll move this down. The exercise I had was reach and pull away, reach and pull away without even grabbing the phone, because I realized I would be reaching for my phone mindlessly.
Totally.
Pulling it out, going on email or something else, and then later realizing, I didn't even need, why did I do that? So I've now trained myself to always pause. And I always like to stress to people, the point isn't to necessarily deny yourself for the ability to tap. It's to pause so that you can decide consciously whether you want to do it or not, instead of just doing it instinctively.
Yeah. Wow. I really like that, Robert, and I haven't done that before. I do know there's like an app that kind of does this for you a little bit. I think it's the Space app where, for instance, like I have like Instagram right here. I tap Instagram and it says, take a deep breath before you do it. It's a similar type of thing where it's kind of like allowing you just a little bit of pause before you move forward. But I think that's a really cool thing, and I'm really curious to see later on when I go back to and I try to open Twitter if I remember it. My guess is that actually might, and even like you said, even if it makes me 10% better, like even if it just reclaims 10 minutes of my day, that's a big shift. It adds up.
It adds up, and like anything else, you do need to practice it with any new habit. You need to practice regularly a certain number of times to cement it into your mind and body. And then you might get it and then lose the habit without, maintaining it over time.
Totally. Robert, is there another exercise, because that was so fun, that comes to mind just to put you on the spot that maybe we can do? Because I thought that was cool. I thought that was really actionable and fun.
Yeah, I mean, you can do many different exercises like this. One of them I like to call a mindful reading of a message, which is probably quite different from how you normally engage in doing email, which is to pull up your inbox, find a message that looks like you might want to read it, and then set your intention to read that message from start to finish without doing anything else, like switching to another app midway, responding to a notification, and then pause, think through carefully what you're going to say in response, and then write the message. Again, all of this is with the intention of not switching to something else midway through. When you're done, read the message from start to finish instead of writing it, tapping it out, and instinctively hitting send. How often do we do that and realize either we made a mistake or said something we regret saying? So read that message from start to finish, pause, and then hit send. And depending on what state you're in at the moment, what other things you're doing, it can be quite difficult, and you might realize how different it is from the way you normally are engaging in reading messages, which might be quickly going through them, scan, delete, quickly respond without fully thinking through what you're going to say, switching over to another app, coming back. It's another way of practicing this pausing and fully focusing your attention on what you're reading, what you're saying. And another thing you can do, that go to a bit of a higher level, which I think would help on the internet in general so much. Think about the person who wrote the message. Okay? Try to get in touch with what was their intention in writing to you. What were they trying to get in their shoes? And then when you write your message, do the same thing. If I were them reading this response, what would I think? How might I feel?
Right.
And see if you want to revise what you're saying in any way. Put yourself in the other person's shoes, which I think you can see why I'd say, this would change how communications occur on the internet. So much of what's hurtful on the internet, I think, results from people not really thinking about or being present enough with the fact that there's another human being on the other side of the communication.
Yeah. Wow. Robert, that was really good. I would like to think for that, the email exercise that you mentioned, it's going to be a lot harder to do that if you're constantly task switching. But if you actually because like, you were doing something else and you went to your email, you just kind of want to pound it out and reply real quick, then go back. But like if you say, all right, I'm going to take 30 minutes and I'm just going to really mindfully slow down and think through it. I mean, I think it's gonna be a lot easier for you to read the message, digest it, write the response, read it, think, is this, visualize the face. Like if you just really take a moment to slow down, but it requires you setting aside that time.
Yes, it does.
Doing it as opposing to switching back and forth all the time. So I think that's great. I love that exercise.
And surprisingly, it's not always true that it will save you time, but people would be surprised at how slowing down in some ways can actually save you time. Let me give you a few examples. One is that you'll make fewer mistakes in your messages. And how often you send the message out with let's meet next Thursday, the 12th. But it turns out next Thursday is the 14th. And the person replies, what did you mean? And then because you're not fully paying attention, you make errors, which cause additional messages to have to be sent.
Totally. For sure. Yeah. No,
there's many ways in which slowing down can actually save you time. And I think, this is something that's learned in the martial arts as well. It seems like a paradox. If you see old masters, very often their movements are quite slow, but they can defeat faster opponents because they're calm. They're not doing anything jerky. Everything they're doing is very intentional. They also know they have time when, let's say, a punch is coming at them. They don't have to react right away. They can wait until that punch is right next to them to move slightly out of the way. They can be quite slow and yet be extremely effective. I mean, that's an analogy, and it's true in many areas of life.
Yeah.
Where slow can be more efficient.
I think about it because I come from the sports background, right? I think about it in baseball. Like we always talk about it's just slowing the game down a little bit. Taking the time to really set your feet, taking your time to take a deep breath instead of just going from next pitch to next pitch. I also think about it when you watch a really talented, I'm not a big hockey guy. I don't know much about hockey, but if I watched, there's the guy for the Sharks, like Joe Thornton. Whenever he has the puck, it's like the game slows down. He's just really just nimble with it, and just he just slows it down a little bit. He's just it's like he's more intentional with what he's doing. It's it's less brute force. It's just more. So I think it applies, like you said, to a number of different aspects of life.
Yeah. And you'll feel better about it. Whether you save time or not, you will feel calmer and less stressed. And, just so much of what results from the way technology works now, unfortunately, is us being in this constant heightened state of stress, even if it's a fairly low level of stress, going through so much of your day being in a low level of stress, heightened alert, is just not healthy. It's not healthy for us. It doesn't feel good, and it does have long-term health consequences. It has impact on the ability to sleep, ability to digest food, and so on. It's not my area of expertise, but I think we all know just from our experience what it can feel like to be constantly on that alert. So slowing down can help with that.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, hey, Robert, I think this is a good place to kind of end, but this has been a really cool episode with, different than some of my other guests. You gave us some really good, like actionable stuff to do, like on the spot, which I thought was really fun. So, this is a powerful episode, and appreciate the time. So where could people learn a little bit more about you and your podcast and all the great work that you're doing?
Yeah, easiest place is to go to technologyformindfulness.com, all one word. And there's our blog. We keep things generally very practical, just like the tips I gave today. We speak to professionals. We speak to parents. We speak to students. We speak to teachers, including people who teach mindfulness. So we have content that addresses all of them. We've got our own podcast where we interview people from all fields, mindfulness teachers, writers, programmers, business people, developing mindfulness, like all over the map. And then we have, as you said, guided meditations on Insight Timer, but they're meditations that you do in relation to technology. And then we have our own courses. So the exercise I showed you where you you pause before tapping is part of our, what we call Tap into Mindfulness course. So that's an online course. You can find all of this through Technology for Mindfulness. And if you go there, sign up for our email list, you will get a beefy guide to mindful tech use. Cool. Again, very practical. It's about 20 pages long. It's quite a substantial giveaway if you sign up for our list. Gives you some examples of how to pause, how to use mindfulness, how to take breaks in certain ways throughout the day, which can really be rejuvenating. So I encourage people to check us out there.
Awesome. Well, thank you again, Robert. Guests out there, Robert Plotkin, Technology for Mindfulness. Robert, this has been a great episode. I appreciate you coming on the show.
Oh, thanks, David. Thanks for having me. I really had a good time.
Yeah.
If you enjoy the show, please make sure to subscribe and give us a rating and review on iTunes. You can also connect with us at americaoffline.info for more great content and to register for upcoming events. Thanks for listening. Now it's time to get offline.